Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, for years and years, the efforts of economic sanction and negotiation process has failed, and the situation are getting worse. The citizens of the Ukraine and Crimea actually deprived the citizenship and forcibly naturalized as Russians. We think, given this harm and seriousness, and given the fact all the alternative has historically and consistently failed, we as NATO need a more active action. What kind of policy are we going to stand for? We're going to send the troops to the border between the Russian and these Eastern Europe nations, such as Polish and whatsoever. And we are also happy to go much more harder. That is to say, establishing a military base and train them and giving them more equipment. I'm going to talk about two things. Firstly, why right now the Russia has a massive incentive to worsen their own aggression, and why it is extremely necessary to take active action. And secondly, why all the alternative, given the dynamics of the international relationship between the Russia and the other country, why all the alternative has failed, and why we need this particular policy. So, on to my first point, why there is a massive incentive for Russia to further the aggression. What we have to recognize here is Russia historically and strategically has a massive incentive to invade these further Eastern Europe countries, such as Poland, for three reasons. Firstly, obviously, there's abundance of resources. Maybe the oil, it may be the cost, it may include the humanitarian resources. And secondly, more importantly, there is also a strategic interest of Russia to gain this land, gain the land of Eastern Europe. It may be to gain further number of the non-freezing harbor in order to expand their capacity to send the navy. It may or may not be to gain more equipment or resources at their factory area in order to empower their own military. And thirdly, more importantly, Russia want to take the advantage of the division between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. What we have to recognize here right now is European Union do not have, and European Union and its Western Europe member do not have a good relationship with Eastern Europe. We see the European Union, EU court that actually pressurize the Polish government in times of their influence of judiciary or whatsoever. Therefore, currently, Western Europe and Eastern Europe do not have a good relationship in the very first place. And here is where Russia just steps in. They want to take this division, take the advantage of this division in order to empower their own hegemony, in order to maintain their international status. Therefore, what we have to recognize here is that Russia has incentive to go further the aggression to more numbers of Eastern Europe nations. What kind of harm what we want to prevent? Two layers analysis. Firstly, obviously, civilians are going to be harmed. They're going to be killed, and if killed in the battle zone and the gunfire on the streets, and a massive chaos in the midst of the chaos of the conflict. Furthermore, if they go against the Russia or and its government like Crimea, they're going to be arrested without a warrant, without a due process of law. And secondly, more importantly, these citizens going to be forcibly naturalized as Russians. Without this, obviously, if they go against the Russia, they're going to be taken away in the citizenship as a Ukraine, as Crimea. Therefore, without this citizenship, unless they change their own citizenship as Russian citizenship, they cannot go to the university. They cannot take their job. They cannot take the position of the church office in the church. This means Russia currently doing right now in this country like Ukraine is cleansing the people, cleansing out the Ukraine citizens and forcibly naturalize them as Russians. Given this harm, there's a clear necessity for the NATO to ensure the security of the basic security of the Eastern Europe nations such as Poland, in order to prevent further aggression. And how we best prevent by this taking policy compared to the alternative? This is the second argument. What we have to recognize here first is negotiation, economic sanction has historically failed for three important reasons. Firstly, There is no deterrence of superpower like US in current right now, because Russia now gained the ally like China and these oppression regimes. They actively currently conducting military drills and have a good relationship. Therefore, they do not care about the other counterparts like United States. Moreover, Putin maintained his support precisely by the narrative of the strong man who never ever concede anything to the Western world. Therefore, domestic citizen just blindly follow his narrative. Therefore, the econ support or whatsoever do not make effect. That's exactly why, even though we impose economic sanction, Putin has a 70% or 80% of popularity rate of his own administration. That's exactly why the U.S. cannot like do not have a huge influence, and moreover, domestic citizens nonetheless supported his narrative. And thirdly, even in the best case scenario, like econ sanction perfectly will work. However, even in the best case scenario, Putin just suppressed their own citizens. They just cut the budget for the remote areas. Even if remote area get antagonized against the Putin, there's a media control. There's a control by the police. There's oppression against the political opponents. Therefore, they just crack down the opponents. Therefore, no meaningful alternative currently exists. Secondly, they may say, after something wrong happened, we can reactively go against. However, to one important response, the reason why we failed to defend the Crimea and Ukraine is without the backup of NATO or UN, just within the 1 or 2 weeks, Russian military go to the capital of Ukraine. Therefore, it is very hard to reactively make a consensus and send the troops and send the military in order to prevent the aggression of Russia. Therefore, it is only way. This post is the only way to preemptively defend this important area. What kind of comparative we are standing for? We are comparatively standing for is preemptively send the troops near the border and establish and train them and make a military basis. Therefore, the military, these weak nations military gonna be enoughly trained, can preemptively prepare themselves for the aggression of Russia, and this is the only way to prevent. Furthermore, Russia do not have so much nerve to go against every single nation in the NATO in the very first place. They can oppress their own citizens. They can oppress their own political opponents. However, they do not have a nerve to go against all the strong nation within the NATO, such including the UK and Germany, US, whatsoever. They may say backlash happen, but antagonization is a status quo. That's not totally mutually exclusive. Therefore, this is the only meaningful and the best way to prevent aggression for the sake of Ukraine, for the sake of weak Eastern nation, goes to the OG. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Prime Minister, and I now invite the leader of the
Ladies and gentlemen, there are actually unnecessary war and unnecessary investment on war, and this is what we say is going to happen at the side of government. The reason why we lost Crimea to begin with is because we provoked Russia, and what we should do is to learn from that mistake, right, ladies and gentlemen? Therefore, at best, at their side of the house, we lost a lot of investment that we should not actually invest on and will further jeopardize NATO country, which we believe is not in the interest of those of our NATO, right? So what do we want to do at the side of opposition? We believe that we're not going to provoke Russia. That means we're only going to send troops, for example, only where there are clear signs of aggression, when there are, for example, troops of Russia, for example, already entering those 4 countries, but will not attack them first. I will not insert our troops first, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, that means the 4 countries would still live independently without NATO if the condition isn't something that we should step in, right, ladies and gentlemen? So that would bring me to my 2 substantive. But before that, few rebuttals at the side of opposition. What haven't they told you? They haven't told you why can't these 4 countries defend themselves at the current status quo, ladies and gentlemen? Which we believe that at the current status quo, there are already mechanisms to actually make like in international, for example, international treaty that allows like make Russia not being able to, like, for example, attack these 4 countries, for example, and especially that given that these 4 countries have the military of their own and like is close in proximity with other European countries, helps can be sent when Russian troops actually be there. Therefore, even without NATO's presence, for example, these 4 countries can defend themselves. But what did they told you? They told you that Russia somehow now have the incentive, for example, an economic incentive, right? Actually, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to harm Russia's economic more when they annex these 4 countries. So it's not within their interest. Why? Currently, Russia's economic is already bad, right? And like when they want to annex these 4 other countries, they would have to invest so much on military, for example, because they know that who they are going to be up against are like NATO's country, for example. Therefore, the capitals would be divided to like investing a lot in military, which cripples the investment on economic, for example, ladies and gentlemen. But more than that, it's Russia knows when they actually want to annex like these 4 countries, they would like harm the ties with the market they currently have, like right? Even Putin values the ties with Trump so big, for example. Therefore, that shows how Russia would not have the incentive to mess around, for example, ladies and gentlemen. And given that, Russia actually, at the current status quo, want to fix their internal country instead of like expansionists, which they told you, and that is wrong. No, thank you. So what are other things, the second rebuttal that I will give to them? They told us that somehow economic sanction currently failed, right? We think the power of an economic sanction, especially right now at the state where Russia is being crippled economically, for example, because the gas export is declining, would be harmful, ladies and gentlemen, especially NATO country has a lot of market ties for Russia, for example. Therefore, economic sanction is not going to be as less powerful as before, and this would mean a lot. And for that reason, their arguments cannot stand. Now, allow me to move on to my first substantive. No, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my first substantive would be about security dilemma. Do bear in mind that at the current status quo, there is no attack yet given by Russia towards these 4 countries. At best, what their case will give, our activity or presence of NATO would give a security dilemma towards both sides, right? NATO and Russia. So what is security dilemma? Security dilemma. We say security dilemma is the state where countries hugely investing on military activity, showing signs to be hostile towards each other, where they prepare against each other, for example. We believe that this state is not peace, ladies and gentlemen. This is because each country, although they're not attacking each other, they're insecure of attacks. The state in which that country are living is not peace because they're insecure, and not secure, not having the state of security. So what exactly is the first step of security dilemma? We think the first step of insecurity dilemma is definitely when you make countries feeling insecure towards each other, not certain, and give the mindset to be defensive, for example, like invest so much in military, right? This is exactly the case that would happen when we follow the government's case. This would provoke security dilemma. Why? What we are going to give, I'm going to take you later, what we're going to give towards Russia is that the feeling of threatened by NATO. What does this mean? For example, we're going to put like, there's going to be a military activity, for example, too close to the proximity of Russia, for example. That is to say, U.S. soldiers being too close to Russia's territory, for example, or like military training, for example, creating missiles, being too close to Russia. This gives them a direct portrayal or exposure that NATO has been preparing for like what is up towards Russia, right? Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, what would Russia feel, given that activity is like that, is that they feel like they need to start preparing for what is up, for example, because the United States, for example, or NATO is actually preparing to attack them, for example, or like NATO, for example, trying to expand even more, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, given that the nature of Russia is very, very sensitive towards what the United States move is like, especially because of the historical reason, right? Sure. What would happen is that insecurity given, we will give insecurity towards Russia because we show them signs of like what we are up to. We are up to military expansion, for example. No, thank you. Military expansion. And given that we already have pacts, for example, with Russia to actually agree not to be expansionist, and if we actually create this, we show signs of expansionist, sure, this would give even more reason for Russia to think that U.S. is the one breaking our pacts, and therefore they can be more expansionist, or U.S. is starting Cold War again, ladies and gentlemen, which we believe the impact of this is not wanted. But before I proceed to the impact, I take opening.
You said right now Russia don't have so much incentive to intervene into European, Eastern European country. Then why Russia will be antagonized?
That is because we put so much. That's because we're not provoking them at first, but because we put so much insecurity toward them, we will provoke them and put that interest. This is not needed, right, ladies and gentlemen, because to begin with, Russia does not have the incentive. Therefore, we're going to invest a lot of money in military just for nothing, for example, when there are other focus, for example. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, security dilemma would be caused, and we think that therefore it jeopardizes our NATO's capitals in other things. That is my second argument. Allow me to move on to my second argument on what should be focused, right? So what precisely is what is important for NATO right now? We believe that the expansion for NATO isn't what is needed. Countering Russia is no longer, it's the past goal that we have. Right now, this is exactly why United States are taking troops, for example, taking troops, for example, and like internal conflicts and like terrorism attack is what we're actually focusing on, right? This motion harms our main focus, right? Why? Because we're currently in NATO countries have limited budget. This is because we spent so much things, for example, on unnecessary things or under investment. This is exactly why Europe right now, for example, are like focusing on like their own countries. What would happen in their side of the house when we invest so much in military? We think we would not have like the capital to invest on our internal economy, for example. Therefore, people who does not feel addressed on the past, for example, the right wing would actually protest even more, ladies and gentlemen, because our tax is invested on something that is unnecessary, for example. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, our capital as NATO countries would not be invested in things that we have to focus. For that reason, put with team opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, and I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I start? Two tension within even one speaker on the opposition side. First of all, he said that after this motion, Russia will have more incentive or more justification to enter into Eastern European country. But at the same time, they said right now they don't have such bad incentive right now, right? If these Russia don't have such incentive to get into this Eastern European country for the sake of resources, for the sake of more allies in international sphere, we don't think this Russia is going to act in a very hateful fashion to Western world, right? That's why the idea that there is a backlash going to happen under this proposal or Russia's aggression behavior will be more aggressive is a concession to the interest of the Russia currently they have to attack into Eastern European country. But second of all, they talk about some alternative, for example, economic sanction that's where, you know what, look at the history. In 2014 or 2015, we actually imposed economic sanction on Russia in response to Russia's aggression to Crimea and Ukraine, right? It didn't work at all. Actually, popularity rate of Putin just decreased by 10% or something like that. Things have never changed. But furthermore, this is a concession to the idea that this is going to further exacerbate the action of Russia, right? Because if they think that economic sanction, other alternative, does work, then why we can't use these methods to counter against the more aggressive action of Russia, right? If this motion is going to antagonize Russia more, then we can employ the alternative as well in response to that, right? It means that exclusive difference between our side and their side is our twofold. First of all, we don't use economic sanction, therefore we never hurt the citizens of Russia as well, right? Because in order for them to deploy, for example, economic sanction, they have to talk about the justification for harming Russian citizens who have nothing to do with the actual aggression of Russia. But furthermore, second of all, my partner already accentuates the necessity and uniqueness of this motion. That is a preemptive action. Right? We think that it's already the status quo, that Russia and Western country and NATO have very, very hateful relationship already, right? It's already antagonized toward each other. Why? Because we have, for example, proxy war already in Syria, for example, right? American government decided to cut the military exports, weapon export to Russia recently. For example, we already have a battle between Ukraine and Crimea already, right? That's why all of the harm that they're talking about is extremely, extremely marginal differences of the extent of the aggressiveness of these Russia's behavior. We don't think this marginal increase of mere possibility of mere aggressive behavior is worth having no preemptive mechanism to prevent these Eastern European countries from being attacked and forcibly being naturalized and lose their own citizenship and so on, and being killed on the street because of the military fight. We don't want to see next Ukraine. We don't want to have a next Ukraine and Crimea in East European country. Several pieces of experience battle continuously. First of all, they said the reason why Ukraine was attacked is because of the antagonism. Well, that's factually incorrect, right? It's not like NATO had a preemptively deployed military in Ukraine, right? Or it's only after Russia intervened in Ukraine and Crimea that America or other country deployed several military to there, right? But it was too late. Already hundreds of citizens was actually killed. They said, well, like, there is international laws we can prevent, and international pacts so we can prevent Russia's aggression. Like, are you kidding me, right? There is already international pact even before Russia attacked Ukraine and Crimea. We don't think this Putin and Russia have incentive to follow international order. If that is true, why things are so bad right now? They said NATO preemptively deploying military can be used as a justification by Putin. Like Putin said, able to point out, hey, NATO is the one who is breaching international law or something like that. No, because we're not breaching international law at all, right? Because we're not sending troops to Russia to begin with technically, right? We're just having military bases in your Eastern European country. We're not attacking Russia. We're not sending any hateful signal message to Russia. That never be deployed as a justification by Putin regime. They talk about insecurity and security dilemma. I mean, I think first of all, many Eastern European countries have already kind of a sense of insecurity there, right? Because the country next to you is attacking another neighboring country already, right? Imagine what if your next neighboring country is attacking another neighbor country. You have a general security, sense of insecurity, right? For example, when South Korea and North Korea is battling with each other, Japan have a sense of insecurity already. We don't think that is exclusive harm coming from their side of the house. But furthermore, they talk about limited resources of NATO and so on. First of all, we think generally Western world we agreed with this motion in the general cases because most of American citizens don't want to see the casualty happening in Eastern European country. They talk about, for example, European Union or other European countries are able to help these Eastern European country. It means it's a clear concession that, for example, some of the time European countries have incentive to help their own member citizens when they are under threat, right? And that's why we don't think budget constraint is a problematic. But furthermore, they need to talk about, so what is the more prominent, more immediate problem happening apart from Ukraine and apart from NATO? It's just saying that there's a budget constraint does not mean anything in this debate. Then why we think that Russia's aggression won't happen under paradigm? Yes, first of all, there is an antagonism already there. That's literally the status quo. But furthermore, important thing to note here is that what is exclusive under paradigm here is that we, NATO and Western society as an international community is going to send an explicit message to Russia as a collective body of Western society, right? In the case of Ukraine, only several countries sent their military, right? And that's why Russia didn't think that there is so many opponents there in the international sphere. But when NATO and all of the Western countries as a collective body say, hey, if you attack Eastern European country, we're going to revenge against you. We're going to protect these Eastern European countries as a collective body. This is going to be a far more strong incentive, disincentive for Russia to attack aggressively, enter into this area, right? But furthermore, that's why even taking the best case scenario, that is to say, there will be some marginal increase of aggressive behavior. This sentiment in Russia does not actually turn into violence against Eastern European Union, right? And that's why that marginal increase of the aggressive behavior does not matter. But furthermore, I want to kill closing opposition, maybe. For example, they might say, for example, behavior in Ukraine will be exacerbated, or this argument is possible on the opposition side. First of all, we are more than happy to send same military to Ukraine, Crimea under paradigm. But second of all, even if there's a trade-off between Eastern European country and Ukraine, we're more than happy to prioritize the victims who are not currently harmed over the people who are already victimized right now. We want to prefer to prevent a future entirety harm rather than mitigating factor, mitigating benefit, mitigating harm, and so on. But furthermore, aggressive behavior is anyway inevitable consequences of any Western foreign policy, right? The existence of NATO in of itself can cause aggressive behavior and so on. Honorable Chair, what we have to recognize here is that alternative does fail or ineffective or does harm Russian citizens or innocent citizens anyway. We think this preemptive mechanism as a collective body of Western society is the only way to prevent next Crimea happening, next casualty happening, next apocalypse from happening. Back to propose.
Thank you. And to close the opening half, we have the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't understand on why when NATO put troops like near the border of Russian country, that it will not exacerbate what the Russia has already done, ladies and gentlemen, because we think that it will be seen as a direct attack, because you are putting troops in country that the border clash with Russian border, ladies and gentlemen, will make it easy to have a direct attack to Russia. Therefore, this is exactly what aggravates Russia in the very first place. So today I will divide my speech in two issues. First, on why Russia will not attack those Eastern Europe countries and why does Crimea different from the rest of them, and secondly, ladies and gentlemen, on why like economic resources, economic sanction will prove a better mechanism to respond to Russia, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to my first clash regarding why Russia will not attack other countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we've already told you on how Russian economy is crumbling right now. And when the rest of the Western Europe and US are hostile towards Russia, like giving sanctions in terms of economic, the only allies that they have is these Eastern European countries, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, when their economy is so intertwined and they are the only ally that they have, ladies and gentlemen, they will not try to pressure or attack these countries, ladies and gentlemen, because they know they cannot handle and ruin this economy that already intertwined in this country, ladies and gentlemen, and give bigger loss to them. Second reason, ladies and gentlemen, why they will not attack, because geographically Russia is like, it's not very strategic, right? They are surrounded by countries, so the only import and export can only be done through these Eastern European countries, ladies and gentlemen. And in regard of infrastructure, Russia know in cost-benefit analysis, it's better to have other government to take care of this infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen, making sure that the import and export from this country will go well without like giving more cost, ladies and gentlemen. If they annex and ruin this country, ladies and gentlemen, they will provide more cost to build up infrastructure and etc. More importantly, in which this country have their own comparative advantage that Russia doesn't have, right? That is why they think that because the economics is so intertwined, and secondly, on how they still need these other products that are not produced in Russia, therefore they will not like annex this country. More importantly, when they know that they don't have enough resources to make sure that the infrastructure and the economic to our country can be taken care by themselves. So why do, ladies and gentlemen, that the Russia want to attack Crimea? Realize that the NATO historically are made in response to Russia, ladies and gentlemen, on how in the like years ago, like Russia is becoming more aggressive, and that's why we have NATO. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we see that Crimea is like one of the Soviet Union's or used to be country, right? That is why Russia feels like there is a sense of belonging to this Crimea, ladies and gentlemen. And now NATO want to expand their influence to other Eastern European countries who used to be in Soviet Union, ladies and gentlemen, who have a culturally similar to Russia, who have like a lot of Russian people there, ladies and gentlemen. That is why the Russia is feeling very possessive in terms of like keeping this country to themselves, ladies and gentlemen. And this is what happened when you are like putting this troop in this type of country, right? And that Russia becoming more aggravated because you think that you NATO are now like taking our influence and ladies and gentlemen, from even though like they already promised that they will not expand, even though they are already not expanding, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why I say to you, when you're putting like a military troop directly near the Russian border, this is exactly what makes them want to attack Russia, want to attack this Eastern European country, because they think that they can easily like attack Russia because it is for the close proximity, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. After my clash, and we can see on how actually just because you are already a NATO member, Russia is already afraid to attack you. On how in 2014, right, Russia did not like attack countries that one of the NATO allies because they know on how the collective allies will attack them and they cannot like fight them back, ladies and gentlemen. And because they know that they will be ruined, ladies and gentlemen. But at the moment when it directly harm their citizens, ladies and gentlemen, when they can like there's some victim from their own country, that's where Russia will react, and that's when Russia will become more aggravated. But before the opening.
After economic sanctions on Russia, Russia's behavior in Crimea exacerbated because Russian government used the narrative that we need to compensate for economical loss by having more resources, right? Why do you think only economical sanction does not get Russia antagonized and only this motion does?
Moving to the next to answer that question, right? Ladies and gentlemen, they say that on how economic sanction does not work, but we don't think, ladies and gentlemen, without economic sanction, their military capacity that Russians have will still be the same, right? At least is with economic sanction. We no longer trade guns and deals with Russia, therefore incapacitating them in terms of military. We do not like give them like natural resources that is very important to them, ladies and gentlemen, and therefore making up like we need to choose which one is more priorities, whether or not it is natural resources from my country or like investing it to other military areas, ladies and gentlemen. Even though it does not like directly work as to cripple down Russian economy, ladies and gentlemen, we think this type of like lowering their capacity to fight back is already a good enough effect of the economic sanction that we give. If they're saying on how Crimea is becoming exacerbated because the economic sanction, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think that any military troops in there, ladies and gentlemen, will be effective without economic sanction. You will still need to give economic sanction to Russia to make sure that your military troops there is working, because you want to decapacitate Russia in terms of military, right? To make sure that your military can win if there is a fight against Russia. So therefore, because your troops can only work if there is an economic sanction, ladies and gentlemen. But in your on your side of the house, there will be an aggression from Russia, while on our side of the house, there will be no aggression. At least we incapacitate them in terms of military. We think that our side is better. Then, second, ladies and gentlemen, right? They say on how we should like provide the justification regarding on how we give economic sanction to Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, realize that that if first of all, we can just simply sanction the government official, right? But moreover, they already say to you that the people of Russia already like support Russian government to attack other country in Europe. Like, this is exactly the justification that we can have to economically discapacitate Russia, right? Even though like it also attacked their citizens, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't think that this is a very harmful notion, right? So that is why, ladies and gentlemen, because I have provided you the reason why Russia will not attack this other country, because they know they are not economically strong enough and they are not militarily strong enough. But when it is directly harmful to their own citizens, when you put troops near their border, that's when they become aggressive. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, we think that this motion should fall. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now invite the government member.
Ladies and gentlemen, we regret how the opening debate is merely becoming a she says and he says debate, right? Because they're merely throwing out like benefits or harms that's going to happen without necessarily explaining the likelihood process on how certain actor is actually likely to behave in a certain way. Therefore, closing government would like to approach this debate by giving you exactly an analysis on how that doing this sort of strategy is actually the best and most proportionate form of strategy to contain Russia. And secondly, by giving you a more clearer output on what are the things that we actually expect to come. Understanding that there is this context when these four Eastern Europe is actually right now in a dilemma whether or not they want to stay within the NATO in itself or simply just side with Russia in itself. But before that, I have several clarifications to make to kick all out of the debate, right? First of all, you need to notice that their argumentations regarding security dilemma is not valid, because they speak as if we are right now living in a peaceful and Russia is not necessarily attacking us, right? But you need to understand is that right, you cannot let them get away by staying in a denial state when they say that, oh, if you do this, you're going to ruin whatever peace we have in status quo. We're not currently living in peace, right? To the fact that Russia even brave enough, for example, to even annex Crimea regarding the fact that right now we actually even make a treaty with them not to necessarily attack, that shows to you that Russia inherently unpredictable, right? You cannot trust whatever word that Russia is actually having right now, and therefore we believe that it is time for us to actually act upon this sort of insecurity. But second point of clarification that I need to make, right? They say that, oh, you cannot do this because Russia would not do this because it's impossible for them to want to destroy these four nations, right? No, Russia doesn't want to destroy them. They want to annex them. They want to invade them and make use of the land and all the natural resources coming from that particular nations. But I'm going to add one more reason why Russia actually wants to do this aside from natural resources, right? Exactly, because in the past there's this sentiments that these people have closer cultural ties with Russia, and there's this huge dream coming from Russia to actually restore like the the glory of old Soviet Union, and that's the reasons right now we're currently currently funding rebels in Crimea, for example, and funding and even trying to spread the narratives within these 4 Eastern nations to actually start joining us back, because right now NATO in itself is not necessarily useful to you. And lastly, regarding the terrorism, right? Because they brought the idea, oh no, NATO needs to focus on terrorism, so on and so forth. Well, we don't necessarily think that it's going to jeopardize our effort in terrorism, right? But even if that's true, we think that terrorism is a global like problems, right? So we're more than sure that other actors like ANZUS or even any other military alliances is more than willing to help NATO, right? So our resources in NATO is not necessarily going to be jeopardized at all. And the rest of the rebuttals will be intertwined. First of all, I'm going to explain to you why is it that enhancing forward presence is a proportionate and strategic form of self-defense by NATO and the Eastern Europe country to begin with. Several reasons, right? First of all, what you need to understand is that we think that Russia attacked Ukraine first, right, in the form of Crimea annexations. Despite all the constructive engagement, despite all the treaties that we actually want to propose to the Russia not to do this sort of things, even Russia go to the extent of lying, right? They simply said, oh no, we're not going to like annex these sort of things. We're not necessarily funding all the rebels. But to the fact that right now they even went ahead to annex this particular area in Crimea, and even funding certain forms of rebel groups to actually topple down the local governments of Crimea, that shows to you that this sort of things is actually created first by the Russia, right? What we're doing is simply a self-defense to protect our fellow allies within the NATO in itself against this breach of a breach of principle and also threat coming from the Russia in itself, right? So we don't necessarily think it's a disproportionate attack, right? Because it's a form of self-defense that we simply give against our fellow country, so that they're not becoming the next victims of Russia in itself. But secondly, what you need to understand is that why it is likely for Russia to be contained and less aggressive when we choose our strategy comparatively to their strategy, right? You need to understand the concepts of mutual assured destructions, right? You need to understand is that we agree that maybe to a certain extent Russia economic might be down, but it's not necessarily so down to the fact that they cannot annex Crimea, right? Because you need to understand annexing Crimea in itself already requires lots of economic costs, but to the fact that they're willing to do that, that means to a certain extent their military still have like reserve cash or whatever it is, and become a prioritizations within the Russian government in itself, right? We believe by establishing mutual assured destructions, that means to say we show them a clear gesture that if you play with us, we're not going to be like hesitant to actually attack you back. It's more likely that Russia to understand that NATO is no longer playing, and NATO is not necessarily going to neglect their fellow smaller 4 Eastern countries, right? Because you need to understand is that NATO militaristic combine is actually bigger comparatively to Russia's military in itself, right? So that the war, it will be inherently costly for Russia if it becomes a full direct confrontational war. So that is to say, us trying to contain these sort of things is comparatively better, right? We're trying all the softer approaches that has failed, but before that, any POI?
Why do you think mutual assured destruction that's not happening now?
Well, because in your side you're not applying this sort of strategy, right? Because in order for an MAD to actually be established, you need to have a direct military face to face, right? You cannot just simply do like another approaches of economic sanctions, because this is just running away from the attack in itself. So that is to conclude, it is more likely in our side of the house that Russia in itself will be contained and not necessarily going to whatever more aggression that they have, because if it becomes a full direct confrontational war, Russia will actually lose the war in itself. But second arguments that I'm going to talk about, right, it's regarding the output. What are the outputs that we expect happen the moment when we do this to protect our fellow Eastern nations? What you need to understand is that in the context right now, there is this growing narratives within these 4 nations, right? Whether or not we need to side with Russia because we think that maybe NATO not necessarily value us because we're smaller, so on and so forth. And this growing narrative is actually very important to be tackled by NATO, right? Because if NATO wants to show that we are sticking so strongly toward our collective defense principle regarding how smaller your contributions toward the allies is, it's very important for us to do this for our members, right? Because you need to actually keep out the influence of Russia's or even like political narratives coming from Russia to actually stay out of these 4 Eastern nations, so that they do not necessarily leave the NATO in itself, right? Why it is likely? Because exactly the moment they feel there's this direct threat coming from Russia after the annexation of Crimea, and to the fact that right now Russia actually trying to fund several rebels or do these suspicious activities within the border in itself, these four nations will feel as if the NATO neglect them, right? Just because they're small, or maybe their contribution is not that big. And that's why it is very, very important for us to actually do this, right? To at least secure and tell our members that you cannot leave us for Russia, that Russia is inherently unpredictable and not trustworthy, and you need to stay with us in order, because we're going to take whatever it takes to actually protect you against the threat of Russia. And therefore, we're very proud as a NATO to actually keep protecting our smaller nations and keeping out Russia influence out of there.
Thank you, and I now invite the opposition member.
At this point of debate, it becomes important to reconcile what is Russia's really behavior, right? Because the only objective that we hear from whole government side is Russia is being aggressive, right? Without telling you to what extent is the aggressiveness is going to achieve, right? Under what kind of circumstances is Russia going to launch this certain kind of aggressive behavior? Because we doubt that in various circumstances, Russia is going to actively intervene into all of these sovereignties or into all of these cultural ties, right? Because I'm going to further deal with this idea, given that closing brought up this idea about how Latvia and how Estonia feels culturally related towards Russia within the post-Cold War ideas. We think that this kind of justification saying that, hey, NATO is now going to have more attention upon you simply by imposing certain military bases is not going to serve as any further justification as saying that now we're helping you to help define and defend your country. And that's why we think that this is very problematic, that the signal that they try to object. So let's first reconcile this idea of Russia and how its extent of aggression is going to achieve, right? Because firstly, opening government concede with the idea that there are cultural divisions between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, right? Because at the point that we think that Russia intervenes, because all of the justification is that Russia actively intervenes in Crimea during this whole referendum process, without actively saying that how currently already within Ukraine, or how people are already being oppressed simply because feeling more related towards Russia, or simply because of the cultural ties that they want to have more support or want to side with Russia. This kind of heavy presence of military bases oppresses and individuals in having to discourse, not only having this discourse. That's precisely the reason why Russia in the first place tried to exert this kind of cultural influence upon these to combat how Western these narratives, simply because we want to maintain you in these particular countries. That's why we think that it's already forced. But now let's see that to what extent is the influence going to exert upon, right? Because now only at the point that Russia is no longer going to be failed, or Russia is no longer being threatened, because under their side, what they try to create is that now more tensions around it, because now the justification that they provide is because geographically you're closer towards Russia. That's why you have that can disincentivize them to actively intervene. However, we don't think that this is the case, right? Because we think that Russia's behavior is not only acts onto a violence because when they themselves feel more threatened, or they themselves feel more threatened, not only because already US in Alaska already has military bases to actually deter them, but more importantly, when the heavy presence in Eastern Europe actually intervenes, it gives them more into the rhetoric of how Russia feels now threatened, which is very distinct. I will further distinct this from our opening in terms of that, about how this is going to fall more into this. But let's first move on to my substantive about why this perpetuation of violence as a means to an end is not going to resolve all of these regional proxy wars, or not going to deal with any of this at the end of the day. Because you have to notice that the comparative is this, right? Under their side, firstly we have to recognize that the premise is that not that these four countries, or the countries that they try to annex, cannot defend, right? Because now we think that comparative is on our side, where individuals deny the cultural difference. We think that the comparative is that when these countries actively signals that we do not want to be annexed or we do not want to do so. We think that Russia, at that point, even if they tries to exert its influence upon that, we think that it's going to be minimum influence or going to be minimum success upon that, given that the whole nation all rejects this whole ideological influence. However, when the comparative exists on their side, when they stand in front of NATO saying that NATO wants to prevent them simply because of the resources that we don't want Russia to gain all of these resources or to gain all of these technological advances, simply because fearing at the end of the day NATO might be threatened or NATO might be combated at the end of the day. We think that it incentivizes a lot more of these regional proxy wars, a lot of these tensions at the end of the day, which never really achieves the goal of saying that we're helping the civilians on the ground at the end of the day. But before I move on to a second, yes, open it.
We're not going to deny the cultural proximity between Eastern European countries and Russia. Have referendum if these people want to have, right? Why do you think it's okay that we give Russia into forcible annexation regardless of the will of these Eastern European countries by military?
The first thing is that the reason why Russia launches all of these forces by annexation is precisely because all of these European Union countries are saying that we want to maintain what we want because more geographic advantage in terms of Russia, tons of having all of those military assets. Because of that, that's why they want to giving the message in the European geographic area. Let's understand idea of how this change in the NATO's behaviors with more escalate along those tensions, right? Because now that they say that look, currently no other alternatives are going to exist because economic sanctions are still going to fail, and all of these negotiations process are going to fail, right? Because notice that the fact is that Russia is really unlike the case that open government brought out in the Korean Peninsula, where Putin is not really the person who is like Kim Jong-un, who is the rocket man. We think that Russia's behavior is more likely to consider upon that whether it's going to further maintain its allies within the Eastern Europe or how necessarily its cultural ties within China is going to strengthen and help necessarily at the end of the day going to sit down for negotiations. Because notice that the fact, not only in United Nations or in Security Councils, where there are a lot of international organizations where Russia really actually sits down and the case is this, that it's not the case where open government raised out that Putin doesn't really care when these economic sanctions really affect, right? The precise reason why Russia then retracts from Crimea is precisely the reason why a lot of these individuals, where economy does suffer, where a lot of these exports are being banned at the end of the day, and precisely we think at that point that Russia's behavior it can be successfully determined on a very large proportional basis because economic sanctions does affect the individuals of Russia and does have the kind of direct attack on these individuals. So we think that how it changes the future considerations of NATO, right? Because now in this case, where they say they're more going to rely on this presence if these military bases are going to be established, because now NATO's behavior is more going to lean towards no further economic negotiations, given that historically Russia never bows down to these negotiations. Given that Russia never does that, it's going to give more legitimacy for NATO to launch these wars whenever this kind of cultural annexation going to happen, and try to actively intervene upon these minds, upon these individuals, which gives them more legit that NATO has the legitimacy to do these kind of actions, to actively intervene in military sense. And that's the reason why it's going to be more problematic in regional sense and harming these individuals, not only because coercing them into the cultural identity that they don't want to agree with, but more importantly, have to them to concede to all of these ideas. We don't think that's fair for these countries and don't fair for Russia, and that's why we think are proud to oppose.
Thank you. And to conclude the government bench, we have the government whip.
I would firstly like to clarify the whole nuance coming from opposition that says these four countries are capable out of defending themselves. I don't think this makes sense at all, right? From the opening opposition, go throughout the closing opposition. Because these countries are more likely poor countries. These countries have less of capacity in terms of military. So the fact that they join NATO shows you that they need NATO and they aren't strong enough to defend themselves by their own. Therefore, we don't think that the nuance coming from opposition saying that these countries can defend themselves is true. In my speech, I'm going to talk about two things. Number one, how do we best contain Russia? And number two, how do we best protect the interests of NATO? So firstly, how do we best contain Russia? First of all, I would like to clarify the whole contradiction that came from opposition bench. In time, they claim that this Russia would retaliate once we are being aggressive. But on the other hand, they claim that Russia currently is economically down. We question the feasibility of how Russia would retaliate you back when Russia currently is economically down and focus on the recovery of their internal economy as opposed to expanding and as opposed to attacking another countries. We don't think that this argument makes sense on that side of the house. This is where CG analysis steps in the debate. Because what opening debate lacks is the process of why Russia is still likely to intervene and come in the absence of NATO presence, and how Russia would react in this motions, right? We would argue to you that in the absence of our presence, Russia would still come in and interfere. It's untrue that Russia will not come at all. There are a couple reasons as to why it's true. First of all, unlike OG that provides a generic reason as to why countries want to invade other countries, we tell you a specific reason as to why Russia wants these specific countries or 4 countries in this Eastern Europe. It is exactly because Russia still feels entitled to these countries, that these countries are part of the empire in Cold War that is being taken away by a lot of countries. That is a specific reason as to why Russia still wants to intervene regardless of our presence. But second of all, the inherent characterization of Putin, in which the president of Russia, which is unpredictable, right? Perhaps they don't attack now, but we don't know in the future whether or not Putin will do something towards these 4 countries. The same reason as to why a lot of agreements between NATO and Russia has been agreed previously, but Putin and Russia continuously to breach that agreement shows and tells you how inconsistent and unpredictable this Russia looks like. But the question then becomes, why is it likely for Russia to stop being aggressive when we present our military in that particular area? There are 3 reasons why that exclusively provided by closing government. Sit down. First of all, is the concept of mutually assured destruction that was never contested by team opposition at all. Part of the reason as to why Russia in status quo continuously intervening or continuously coming in is because of the fact they know that these countries that are coming in is small states. States that don't have the bigger capacity to contain them back or to counter them back. In our world, when we collectively collect our resources, it means that we are bigger. We are mutually assured. We are mutually strong in Russia. That's the moment that Russia less likely to go into that because they know there's a big cost that they would like to avoid because war is inherently costly, especially using the characterization of opposition that Russia is economically down. This mutually assured destruction analysis makes sense in our world because when we are also strong, Russia is strong, it's less likely because they know that the cost would be applied to both entities and it's less likely for them to attack. But second of all, exactly in our proposal, Russia would change their behavior because they know that going to small state now looks so unpopulist because of the fact that now NATO put a position and take an explicit stance in that side of the house. But thirdly, we would argue that more likely Russia would not be aggressive, but the way in which they would trying to persuade these countries is by another metrics, such as persuading through economical empowerment, the same way Russia do for Greece when Greece is in the economically downturn. This is a better way, although we acknowledge that Russia would still be aggressive, but at least the method that they are using is another method that are not that bad method that cost collateral for these countries. And they would persuade countries by doing, for example, giving economical empowerment, giving things such as subsidy for these countries. And that's perfectly fine, even if it's true that Russia would still be aggressive in our side of the house, the same way they do it to Greece. But even if, right, at worst case scenario, it's true that Russia would attack back and it's going to be super hostile, we question we question why opposition never answer, why us as NATO can't beat off this Russia, given that we have a lot of resources and a lot of military capacity. We think it's perfectly fine, although we go to the extent of war, at least under our side, we have a bigger forms of capacity in comparison to Russia. That's to conclude that this multi-layer analysis tells you that it's likely for Russia to change, but even if they don't change, we think it's perfect trade-off that we're willing to take. Yes.
How is mutually assertive destruction not happening right now when Russia knows NATO's powers that in which they do not have nuclear power, for example, and Eastern Europe is backed by NATO?
Okay, now the reason as to why mutual assured destruction doesn't work out is because you don't deploy military. Now you are going to enhance your military, so that would work. Because in status quo, you neglect these countries and you just like trying to negotiate or condemn Russia as opposed to a tangible manifestation of help towards these countries. Second question, how do you best protect the interests of NATO? Because they claim that this is a form of unnecessary military investment. I don't think this argument makes sense given the fact that all investment done by NATO is inherently military. So I don't think why it's unnecessary on our side. What is the output that is explicitly provided by closing government? The output that we propose under our side is to maintain our constituent in which these 4 countries, because in status quo, these countries always being sacrificed. Even when they didn't want to invest in military, NATO tells them to do so. At least now, we show an explicit stance that we are here to protect you and you shouldn't go anywhere other than going to NATO. Why this argument is important? Because if you don't do it now, and Russia's influence continuously to flourish in these countries, more likely these countries would be the same happen like Ukraine, right? Because a lot of the times when you let this Ukraine doesn't stay with us, what happens is that when Ukraine do referendum, they choose Russia over another country like Europe, right? That is why, the reason as to why they did this is exactly because NATO and another European constituent doesn't pay full attention towards these countries and doesn't give a holistic benefits towards these countries. At least in our world, we protect them and we provide this sort of explicit stance that these countries would still be protected in our side. That's the moment that although Russia, how many times of aggressivity and form of influence that Russia would do, these countries would still choose NATO over Russia. This argument is important because when NATO increase the presence, it's less likely for them to move out because we show a friendly gesture that we're willing to protect for these countries in any scenario. What we have told you is 2 things. We have told you that the process of that Russia to be less likely to be aggressive in comparison to opening, only talk about the output of that, how Russia would look like without necessarily telling you the process. But secondly, the protection of these small countries, which is the most important part, we're very proud to propose.
Thank you. And to conclude the debate, we have the opposition whip.
Ladies and gentlemen, today the government side raised a problem that the 4 countries are strong enough to defend themselves. But the real problem in today's debate is that the Russian Federation has the incentive to actively invade these countries. We say that today's debate ultimately boils down to 2 basic questions. Number 1, what is the true nature of Russian Federation? Does Russian Federation have those incentives to invade these countries in Eastern Europe? And second question is, under which side of the house would there be more conflicts? Would there be more chaos between these regions? We see that the 2. I'm going to in my speech, I'm going to explore the questions. 2 questions. Number 1. In terms of what is the true nature of the Russian Federation, the whole government bench kept talking about that the true nature of Russian Federation is that the Russian Federation is very aggressive. But let's see how did they justify? But let's see their justification as to why Russian Federation is actually very aggressive. Number 1, they claim that because of the fact that Russian want all those like natural resources, for instance, like oils and gases in Eastern Europe states. But we say that, but the real case is that currently there is actually trade smoothly going on between these countries about this trade of gas and natural resources, which would believe that it is important both to the economic benefits of those Eastern Europe states, also to the economic benefits of the Russian Federation. We see that this doesn't justify the reason why a Russian Federation becomes aggressive. And secondly, they claim that there is an incentive. The Russian Federation might go aggressive because they want to. Because Russian want to gain the land of all those Eastern European countries, but they give no justification as to why why would like Russian Federation try to gain the land? As to when and where did the and secondly, as to when and where did all those actions, for instance, gaining land of another country, has Russian Federation done before? We see that even in the case of Ukraine, the fact that Russian Federation exerts influence on the Ukraine affair is because of the fact that Crimea has a closer tie, a closer relationship, a closer tie to Russian Federation, and that is also a unique contribution coming from the closing opposition side. And thirdly, they mentioned that the cultural ties make it even easier for the Russian Federation to invade the four countries. Also, closing opposition has given you the unique contribution as to that the reason why, for instance, the Crimea effect is because those countries, those Eastern European countries, because of the fact that they have previously closer like emotional ties to the Russian Federation, and that is to say, within those countries there are eternal conflicts between in these countries, meaning that the citizens in those countries actually. Meaning that there is actually internal conflicts happening in these countries, and that is the reason why Russian Federation exerts its influence on those countries, not because of the fact that Russia wanted to go aggressive or wanted to like invade these countries. And thirdly, they claim that Russian Federation is very aggressive, but notice the fact that Russian Federation only goes aggressive when it is threatened. We see that this is the bottom line of the Russian state. We see that in the cases when Russian Federation's security is not threatened, we see that there is no reason why Russian Federation would go aggressive. Even in and secondly, in the best case scenario, the Russian Federation does goes like aggressive. We see that those military, we see that the collective defense system in those countries only give Russian Federation more excuses to like invest on military affairs and even cause more chaos and even more conflicts, even more tension in those regions. We see that this is not the case that we want. And secondly, even if like, so moving on, our closing opposition uniquely giving you the characterization of the very nature of Russian Federation. That is to say, even if in the current status quo, Russian Federation is actually exerting like cultural influences on the neighboring countries, we see that this is only limited in the spectrum of cultural influences. We see that in the status quo, there's those like the influences exerted on the neighboring countries were not in the form of military. And thirdly, and secondly, even in the best case scenario of the government case, that there were more like collective defense systems, more military in the borders, in the agency, in those areas. We see that in this case, the citizens of the Russian Federation living in those areas will only feel more oppressed. This only gives the Russian Federation even more incentive to invest more in military. We see that this is not the case that we want. And thirdly, they mentioned, the whole government bench mentioned that all the alternative fails, all the alternative like to deter like Russian Federation fails. But we see my partner has told you that there is currently sufficient deterrence. For instance, there is like missile devices, missile equipments in Alaska, in which case the missile distance is actually enough for those missiles to attack Russian state. We see that those deterrence is actually very insufficient to deter Russian Federation, and we see that these collective defense system. We see that the collective defense system only aggregate the tension in those regions. We see that this is not fair, and we see that this is not the case that we want to see. And the second question of today's debate is which side of the house will create even more tension in those regions. Closing opposition has told you the very nature of NATO. That is to say, when having more like collective defense systems, we are actually coercing those NATO countries, regardless of the ideology, regardless of the cultural background of these countries. We are actually coercing all the states of NATO to the ground that is to go against Russian Federation. We say that this, number one, we say that this internal coercion is unfair is unfair. And secondly, we see that all these actions only give more excuses to Russian Federation to have more like military devices in those regions, which at the end of the day only cause more harms. So in conclusion, the unique contribution coming from the closing opposition is, number one, we told you the very nature of Russian Federation is that when the Russian Federation is not threatened, Russian will not attack the neighboring countries. And secondly, we told you that there will only be more chaos in this region. Based on that, proud to oppose.
Thank you everybody for a great debate. We'll go down to the results.